So at the outset, I would like to thank the Center for Indian Studies of the Institute of Oriental Studies, Russian Academy of Sciences, to actually give me this opportunity to share my thoughts on this very, very important theme of the seminar, that is theory and practice of constitutional development in the Republic of India. I feel very honored and privileged to be a part of these deliberations, more so because some very dear friends are attached to this great center of yours. So thank you so much for giving me this chance. Now, I would be speaking on religion and politics in contemporary India, a broad overview of how the dynamics of religion and politics play out in the Indian political landscape as well as the social landscape. Now, as we all know that though India does not have a recognized state religion, the presence of religion in the social and political life of the Indian nation is too profound to go unnoticed. In India, religious identity has been central to the social and individual experiences of the population at large. And the working of Indian democracy over the last 7 decades reveals that the social power of religion emerges in the form of political capabilities, and in an electoral democracy such as India, political parties are quick to tap to this source of power. My brief presentation will broadly deal with the relationship between religion and politics in India. The key questions being, how has religion shaped and determined the course of Indian politics? How is secularism understood in the Indian context? And how has the principle of secularism operated in a country where religion is an important aspect of social life and also a powerful tool of political mobilization? Now, among the post-colonial societies, India's constitutional journey has been very unique. Unlike some of her South Asian neighbors, independent India self-consciously pursued the ideals of liberal democracy, which entailed the principles of formal and legal equality, universal adult franchise, and an elected representative form of government, and most significantly, the ideal of secularism. The term secularism was not initially used in the Constitution of India. It was added to its preamble by the 42nd Amendment to the Constitution in the year 1976. Prior to that, in the landmark Keshavanand Bharti versus the State of Kerala 1993 judgment of the Supreme Court of India, this judgment declared in clear terms that secularism was an integral part of the Constitution's basic structure, along with other basic traits such as the supremacy of the Constitution, republican and democratic form of government, separation of power, and the federal character of the Indian Union. Now the question arises, how did the founding fathers of the Indian Constitution envisage the relationship between religion and politics? Well, the idea that religious communities formed discrete groups with a separate and distinctive identity was recognized by the British colonial rule, and hence separate political representation was given to identified groups and communities in British India. Consequently, the framers of the Indian Constitution ensured that members of different religious communities were included in the discussions on the rights of citizens in the Constituent Assembly. As a result, the notion of secularism incorporated into the Indian Constitution received a different and unique interpretation. Now, what was this unique interpretation? Well, secularism in the Indian context surfaced as a commitment to the ideal of religious non-discrimination. Now, this principle was actualized by the Constitution in two ways. First, through an implicit agreement that the state would not establish religion, any religion for that matter, as the official religion. And secondly, by granting equal religious and political liberty to all religious communities. The first point complied with the dominant Western conception of secularism. And the second point gave the notion of secularism in India a distinct content. How was it so? Well, in the Indian context, secularism did not translate into the eclipse of religion from the public arena. Rather than pushing religion to the private domain, the Indian Constitution recognized the presence of many religious communities with distinct moral and social codes and also distinct ways of life. The right to profess, propagate, and practice their religion was given to each individual and by extension to each community by Article 25 of the Indian Constitution. The right to perform and observe religious practices is significant in the Indian context because in India, religious practices are collective in nature and performed mainly outdoors, in the public arena, in the form of processions through streets of a city or an assembly assembly of people on the banks of the river, like in the case of the Kumbh Mela. The state thus is expected to proactively make the necessary arrangements for such events. These arrangements could be infrastructural arrangements. These arrangements could also mean deployment of security forces and police in adequate numbers to ensure that there is no law and order issue. Now, the constitutional structure in India has operated with the belief that religion is a constitutive element of individual identity. As it is an important marker of personal identity, it inevitably enters the public arena. People, including those in public life, are unlikely to mute their religious identity and should not be expected to do so. Consequently, recognition of religion and religious differences has been extended in several ways by the Indian state. At the immediate level, religious symbols and markers of religious identity has been accepted. Communities can wear their specific headgear and other elements of their dress code, such as the turban or the kirpan, like in the case of Sikhs. Even in the workplace, both civilian and military workplace, they can even sport a beard. In the police, in the army, depending upon their religious belief system. Similarly, religious practices are also permitted, such as rendering collective prayers or namaz in public areas, street processions during Ram Navami, Muharram, processions to commemorate the birth anniversaries of the Sikh gurus, processions of other religious sects too, the Puri, Jagannath Puri Rath Yatra. These are some examples. And also public property and land is also used for religious functions like in Durga Puja, which is currently going on in India. Most significantly, the state has recognized the presence of plural and diverse personal laws, as well as the right of the religious institutions in the enunciation and interpretation of these codes. However, while guaranteeing the right to religious practices, the framers of the Constitution were mindful of the fact that many a times existing community practices disadvantaged sections within the community itself, particularly women, or for that matter, scheduled castes and scheduled tribes, that is the vulnerable groups and sections within the Indian society, sections excluded and discriminated against within the religious community itself. The Constitution thus has allowed the state to intervene and legislate to promote equal and fair treatment for the vulnerable sections of the society, even if it means challenging the existing personal codes and religious laws of communities. Now, reconciling the concerns of religious diversity with those of equality has been a major challenge for the Indian state. And the state has been pretty proactive in this regard. A number of landmark legislation have been introduced from time to time, such as marriage laws, Special Marriage Act, raising the marriageable age for young girls, acts against child marriage, female infanticide, property rights, and of course, laws against untouchability, temple reforms, the triple talaq laws, etc., etc. It is most significant, and in fact, the most significant aspect of religious liberty as provided by the Constitution was that communities are permitted to set up their own educational institutions. Article 30 of the Constitution gives all minorities, both religious and linguistic, the right to establish and administer educational institutions of their choice. They are also eligible to receive financial and other support from the state. Most importantly, they can even impart religious education. This is significant because in state-run educational institutions, imparting religious education is prohibited. Now, in addition, Article 26 of the Constitution gives all religious communities the right to establish and maintain institutions of religious and charitable purposes. There are several such institutions in India, notably the Arya Samaj, the Ramakrishna Mission, the Society of Jesus, the Shiromani Gurudwara Prabandhan Committee, to name a few. Now, how should we understand the notion of secularism in India? Well, there are scholars who believe that the political structure of secularism is irrelevant and out of place in societies like India, where religions are totalizing in nature. They claim that the framework of secularism has been imposed upon the social fabric of the society that is deeply religious, and hence it does not fit well. Now, this kind of discourse by certain scholars is because these scholars associate secularism with the doctrine of rigid separation between religion and politics. The Indian example proves that secularism as a commitment to non-discrimination on religious grounds can be pursued in many different ways. Democracies become secular not just by separating and disestablishing religion, but by expanding the scope of individual liberty and removing the legal basis for religion-based discrimination. This also means that if the need arises, the state will be allowed to initiate social reforms and legislate to protect the interests and welfare of the weaker sections of the society. In other words, special social circumstances can warrant deviation from the norm of separation between state and religion. Indian secularism has a distinct flavor, one which cannot be captured by the concept of separation of religion and the state. It has to be understood in the context of the historical evolution of the concept and also the historical context of what India is all about. Now, how do we locate religion in the political domain or the political landscape of India? Well, in India, religion is not just an aspect of individual life. It has a pronounced presence in the social and political life of the polity. The concerns of religious communities, in fact, are taken up and articulated by both secular parties, the so-called secular parties, and the identity-based political parties. However, it's important to bear in mind that religious political parties are not the only authentic voice of the religious communities, though they may claim to be. It would also be a mistake to assume that only religious communities with separate political parties, it could be Muslims, Hindus, or Sikhs, in fact, only these kind of political parties are represented in the political process of India. This is not the case. In fact, there are multiple channels through which interests and demands of religious communities and their members are represented. And over the years, we would see, ever since independence, all political parties have supported religious and cultural demands of specific communities. The compulsions of electoral politics, the objective of winning is such that even the so-called secular parties have not hesitated to articulate at times very forcefully the religious and cultural demands of specific communities. In the Indian context, it is pertinent to remember that there are plural identities that cross-cut and reinforce each other. Identities based on caste, language, and region constitute alternative axes of community formation. This means that religious communities are internally divided, and attempts to construct a homogeneous identity is always challenged. Multiple identities give rise to different solidarities, and each of these solidarities can be mobilized independently for various reasons, including electoral politics. In other words, the space for identity politics is enormous in India, and yet no one kind of identity politics can gain a hegemonic position. As a result, even though religion occupies a central place in individual and social life, and also there is space for religious parties to actively participate in the politics of the country, this space is by no means a secure space. It continues to be challenged by multiple solidarities that go beyond religion. Now, what distinguishes the so-called secular parties and the religious political parties is that the secular parties consciously seek to forge a coalition of interests. They appeal to a wide social base that cuts across communities of caste, religion, and language. On the contrary, identity-based parties appeal to and privilege the concerns of group they seek to represent. Even if they reach out to other communities, which they do because of electoral compulsions, it is the core social base which they tend to nurture. Interestingly, the presence of religious parties compels even the secular parties to take positions on religious issues. We know what is happening in the case of triple talaq, or for that matter, the Sabrimala issue, or other Ram Mandir issue. So no political party can afford to be neutral or, over on issues of religion. Now, I would now conclude by saying that political parties in India, including religious parties, have raised and supplemented their development agendas with the religious and cultural concerns of the people they claim to represent. So there's no party which is solely dependent on religion. In fact, the issues of livelihood, issues of development is central to the election manifestos of all political parties. Development issues figure highly in the agenda of all political parties, including the religious parties or caste parties or other parties based on language or region, etc. In this regard, we can say that there is this duality visible in the Indian political landscape. And religion per se has yielded a mixed legacy. Despite the episodic communal violence between communities, at times triggered by vested interests, in the lived practices of the people of India, religion has been a source of inter-religious harmony through cross-cultural exchange over centuries. The political class recognizes this fact, and perhaps it is from this reality that Indian secularism derives its character and strength. Thank you so much.